Greetings ladies and gentlefish. In this video I wanted to talk to you about two main things. Firstly, the matchmaker, and secondly a bit about kind of some basic gunnery. So firstly, the matchmaker. Now, in case you haven't worked out by now, the matchmaker is the thing that decides what match you're going to be in when you hit that big red shiny battle button. So for example, if you are driving a tier 1 machine, like the L tractor here, the like tractor or lol tractor as it's often called, you can see games that involve tier 1 and tier 2 machines. If you're driving a tier 2, you can see games involving tier 1 and 2 machines, or games involving tier 2 and 3 machines. So this means that sometimes you will be the top tier tank, i.e. you will be a tier 2 tank, like for example the cruiser, in a tier 2 game, so there are only tiers 1 and 2 to shoot at, so you will always be shooting at equal tier or weaker lower tier opponents. Or you might be in a game with tier 3s, in which case you are at the bottom. Now in each of these cases the matchmaking you get is atypical. So for tier 2, as I say, you can see the maximum tier spread you can see is one tier higher and one tier lower. As soon as you make it to tier 3, you'll notice that this changes. So if I just find a tier 3 for example, here's the sexton. Then you start getting introduced to the real matchmaker. Right, so tier 3 can get into games with tier 3s and tier 2s. That's fine, so that's the best matchmaking you will see. You can also get into games that involve tiers 3 and 4, and games that involve tiers 3, 4 and 5. That means you can get into games with this thing, for instance, or as a tier 3 you can see tanks such as the Excelsior, tier 5, the Churchill, tier 5, etc. The T-34, that's a tier 7, sorry, wrong one. That T-34, tier 5. When you're in a tier 4 tank, you can get into games with tier 3 and 4 machines. So let's say for example you're driving the Matilda. This could get into a game with tier 3 and 4 machines, with tier 4 and 5, 3, 4 and 5 machines, or with tier 4, 5 and 6 machines. So this can come up against the T-34-85, for example, or the Cromwell, or any one of a number of different machines, the 88, for instance. And that is the standard spread. So normally, most tanks you drive, you can see down to 2 tiers below you and up to 2 tiers above you. So driving a tier 6 for example, like this, the 88, you could be in a game that has tier 4s in it, in which case you would be at the top of the list. You would be one of the most powerful machines in that game. You would be a tier 6 in a maximum tier 6 game. Or you could be looking at tier 8s, in which case you would be at the bottom. You would be a tier 6 in a maximum tier 8 game, so you would be shooting at tiers 6, 7 and 8. So that's the standard matchmaker, 2 tier spread either way. There is an exception to this. If you decide to drive scout tanks. Now, scout tanks, this category encompasses most, but not all, tier 4 and above light tanks. So if you were driving a tier 4 light tank, so for example I had the M5 Stuart, I don't have it anymore, but I had the M5 Stuart before getting the Chaffee, that can see up to tier 8 games in a tier 4 machine. The matchmaking is quite brutal, and that can be really hard, and often there are tier 4 light tanks that get scout matchmaking, as it's known, but they're not on a scout tech line. Maybe you're actually going down a medium line, or maybe a heavy line even, but you get scout matchmaking lumbered on you at some point. Now the worst tier spread I'm aware of is for this thing, the Chaffee. It's a tier 5 American light tank. Can it see tier 5 maximum games? Not that I'm aware of. If you're lucky you'll be in a tier 6 maximum game, but this thing can see tier 10s, and I don't even own a tier 10 to compare it with. The highest tier machine I own is tier 9 somewhere. There we go, the pattern. Tier 9. So you can immediately see that, especially if you're going to play scout tanks, you can start getting into some horrible games. And you might say, well, how are you expected to deal damage when you're bottom tier, let alone when you're playing a scout tank? Well, a lot of the time you're not. but I do have some videos up where I managed to do so, and it depends from machine to machine, but if nothing else, you can always spot things, you can scout, you can find out what's going on for your team and make them more informed, which is a good thing to do. So just be aware of that as you progress up the tiers. The matchmaker can be a bit of a pain, and it used to be far worse. It used to be that the matchmaker, you know, had a 3-tier spread, so tier 5s could see tier 8s, for instance, rather than a 2-tier spread. So that out of the way, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was some basic gunnery. And I don't know why I'm going to the menu for that. For that, I'm going to quickly play through the battle tutorial. Boom. So this is a tutorial you can do, and I would thoroughly suggest that you do when you start up the game.
Welcome to battle training. Here you will learn to control your tank and destroy enemy vehicles.
And you get this narrator for you. So you can see we're driving a T-34-85 here, Russian tier 6 medium tank, and he's just going to go through some basics for you.
Point the camera at the military vehicle next to your tank.
So here's some basics.
Move the mouse left and right.
There we go.
The turret follows the camera as you move it. Point the camera at the ambulance next to your tank.
Yep, I'm going to get to the gunnery bits in a minute. One thing I would like to point out is as you turn the turret around, you can see that the aiming circle, this dispersion circle in the middle, flares out before shrinking back down. So it means that if you fire while you are... So I can actually move. You'll notice it does it a lot more when you're on the move. So if you fire when you're moving, your shots will be a lot less accurate. So for example, I can aim in and wait for the shot to close in and just shoot at that crate. But if I do it on the move, I find it much harder to accurately hit. I mean, see where that shot went, to accurately hit what I'm aiming at. So that's the first thing to bear in mind. If you generally want to wait for that aiming circle to close in before taking a shot. As with everything, there are exceptions to the rule. But for now, let's just follow what the guy is saying. So we're just going to drive over here with the WASD keys. Hurrah!
Move along the road. Take care not to damage buildings or vehicles.
Now he says take care not to damage buildings or vehicles. Why would that be? Well, if someone's playing an artillery piece, they can get an overhead view of the battlefield, and so even if you haven't been spotted, they notice you doing something like this. They notice all that destruction. Okay? So it's always a good idea not driving through destructible bits of scenery when you can avoid it. We'll get onto the gunnery bits in a second.
Congratulations, you've learned to control your tank.
I've learned to control my tank.
Move to the firing position.
Excellent.
It is marked on the mini-map in the bottom right corner of the screen. When crossing the swamp, note that difficult terrain reduces vehicle speed and maneuverability.
So difficult terrain will slow you down, so that's also something to bear in mind. And if you want to travel fast, you can double tap the R button. So pressing R once makes you move slowly, twice makes you move fast, pressing it 3 times, or pressing it twice in quick succession just puts you at top speed as if you were holding down the W key. So this is a firing range against a stationary enemy target, and in this instance,
destroy the enemy vehicle.
This is a tier 6 machine.
Wait for the aiming circle to shrink. Wait for the gun to reload before firing again.
Okay.
Use the mouse to aim your gun at the enemy.
When the narrator's
you aim directly at the enemy vehicle, it is outlined in red.
Stopped talking. So, this is a tier 6 machine that I'm driving. My target is a tier 4. So, don't be surprised if, you know, this is a very easy target to penetrate. Now you'll notice, see the dot at the middle of my aiming circle is currently red. If I move it over the enemy tank, it's gone green. That means that my shot has enough penetration to go through the armour where I'm currently aiming. There you go, nice big chunk of health taken off. And now I'm going to be awkward and aim for the commander's hatch. There we go, taking him out. You can still see the flaring going on.
You've destroyed your first enemy. Move to the firing position. It is marked on the mini-map in the bottom right corner of the screen.
So unless you have a particular reason why you want to fire on the move, or fire before you're fully aimed, maybe you don't think you have time before someone shoots you, then you really want to be aimed in if you don't have that. So, here's a Tiger. Tiger 2.
Destroy the enemy vehicle. Before you fire, wait for the aiming circle to snap onto the target.
Now in this instance, before, I was a tier 6 medium tank shooting a tier 4 medium tank. It didn't matter where I aimed. This is a tier 8 heavy tank, so don't be surprised if your shot bounce. And here's another thing, actually I'm going to wait because I think it gets mentioned later on. So I'm just going to aim, and you'll see that the marker now is red rather than green. See that? Middle of my aiming circle? It's red.
We didn't penetrate their armor.
Oh no, sorry, it's green, not red. My bad. Alright, actually, that's a good thing to note. So, that penetration marker isn't always reliable. The only thing it takes into account is the raw thickness of whatever you're shooting at. There's a shot at the turret. Still bounced off. But you'll notice...
to penetrate frontal armor.
So yeah, one of the nice things about being in a medium tank is that you have the mobility to get around the sides now. Which is what I'm going to do. And that's what, I've been told to do. So, the armour at the front might be too thick for me to really penetrate. And that's because the sloping of the armour matters. So you can see the front of the Tiger 2 is sloped there. So, oh, it wants me to go around there, fair enough. So, it's not just the raw thickness that's important, it's also the sloping that's important. So I'm just going to move to the firing position they've asked me to move to. And you can see, whereas I was bouncing on the front...
Destroy the enemy vehicle. Aim at the sides and rear. These are the weaker parts of any vehicle.
Where I was bouncing on the front, I'm now going to just sail straight through the sides. And we'll aim at the turret this time.
Enable auto aim.
So.
To avoid being an easy target, in a real battle you'll have to keep moving. Enable auto aim for easier aiming on the move.
So auto aim, you right click on the target.
Destroy the enemy vehicle while you're on the move. You don't need to take aim now. Auto aim will do the job for you.
And you have what's known as auto aim, which means you automatically target your opponent. This has its advantages and its disadvantages. I would not advise using this all the time, and most of the time you should aim manually, because if you auto aim, you don't get to aim for weaker parts of the armour, which I'll talk about more in another video. But for example, let's go back to the front. And I'm going to try shooting at the front of his turret. And I'm just going to demonstrate a point. In fact, I shot the front of the turret earlier on and you saw what happened. I'm just going to do it again just to show you. So, front of the turret. Okay. Right in the middle. Bounced. Now, if I'm auto-aiming... Oh, they've actually changed that in a recent patch. Auto-aiming used to tend to target the turret. But imagine that whatever bit of armour auto-aim was targeting was not a bit I could reliably penetrate, but instead I could penetrate another part of his armour. Then you wouldn't necessarily want to use auto-aim. So when do you want to use auto-aim? Well, mainly when you're too busy to aim it manually yourself. Usually if you're trying to keep moving and move around the target, for example.
Good job. You have destroyed a heavily armored enemy vehicle. Move to the marked position and detect the enemy. Find and destroy the last enemy tank. You can only detect enemy vehicles within your view range.
So that, for example, was an enemy King Tiger that went.
To conceal your position. Use bushes and foliage to make your tank harder to detect.
Bushes
Note
can...
that stationary vehicles are less visible. Use sniper mode to aim at long-range targets. Destroy the enemy vehicle. To hit a moving target at long range, aim at the front or ahead of the enemy tank.
So this is important, and we're against a Panther here. So a couple of things. Firstly, this is third person mode. You can also go into sniper mode. You can either do this by using the mouse wheel, and you can have different degrees of zoom, or, oh hang on, let me just get rid of a window that popped up. Or you can just hold down the shift button and it will automatically take you to sniper view. Okay? So, here's one of the disadvantages of auto-aim. This is against a moving target. So, auto-aim just aims at the centre of mass, and if the target that you're trying to fire at is moving, then by the time your shot goes where you've aimed it, the guy's moved and your shot misses. So what should you do in this situation? Well, you should try and aim ahead of your target. This involves manual aiming. See, that one was poorly aimed. The easiest way to do this, go into sniper mode, however you see fit, and then aim a little bit ahead of your target, like this. Now, how much you aim ahead of your target depends on how fast he's going. So if I aim all the way out here, my shot will miss. But likewise, if I don't lead my shot, as it's known, enough... Oh, he's turning now. I'll demonstrate it in a second. So if I don't lead my shot enough, then my shot will miss. So in this instance, you know, something like here is not bad. And so you just keep wailing on him until he dies. I'm just going to wait for him to be moving. This is supposed to be a moving target demo. One more shot will take him out. You can still see it blare, the targeting reticle blooming every time I fire. Oh, that was a terrible shot. Every time I turn the dude up, the turret. There we go, just take him out. And that was it, some basic gunnery.
To conceal your position and fire at long-range targets. Training completed successfully.
So there was some very basic gunnery for you. Just trying to go through some of the things. Go away. Some of the things they go through in the tutorial. Now, there's also a video you can play here if you want that will, you know, might give you some hints and tips that you find useful. But the only thing I would leave you with saying is that generally speaking, you want to use manual aim rather than auto aim. And you know, you'll see me usually manually aim if you've watched any of my videos. So there we go. That was that was a video just quickly talking about the Matchmaker and talking about some very basic gunnery. And you know, just going through the tutorial to do that. I hope you guys found it vaguely useful. If you did, please feel free to catch some other videos on my channel and or subscribe. And I wish you happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.